Hey everybody, and welcome to the 5 Bytes podcast. I'm your host, Rory Monahan. Coming up on this week's episode, Island.io has doubled in valuation after another series of massive funding. AWS response to customer issue could mean lower bills for other customers in future, and Apple reportedly throwing their hat into the AI ring. For this and more, keep listening to this episode of the podcast, which of course, as always, is brought to you by my sponsors. And that includes ControlUp, end-to-end digital experience management for the work from anywhere era. ControlUp, happy users, happy IT. And also brought to you by Networks Policy Pack, where you use group policy, Policy Pack Cloud or MDM, to remove local admin rights, manage and lock down applications, Java, browsers, and mitigate ransomware, plus more. And of course, also brought to you by Numescent, the inventors of the first and only cloud-native container management platform for Windows desktops. If you enjoy the show each week, you have these awesome sponsors to thank. And now for some news. Recently on the podcast, I covered the fact that Island.io received $100 million in Series C funding, and at the time was valued to be at about $1.5 billion. Well, this week they received $175 million in Series C funding, and is now valued at $3 billion according to a report by the Register. At the same time, I saw reported from IGEL Disrupt that Citrix were highlighting their enterprise secure browser too. It is interesting that Island.io has really caught fire in under 2 years, whereas others in the space who have been offering similar features have seemingly gone overlooked. It appears Island provides a self-updating Chromium browser, and the cool aspects that I see that looks maybe more advanced than some of the competitors is around their granularity of control and logging of user activity. It'll be interesting to see how the competition reacts. I mean, the major overlap seems to be that it's security in terms of not allowing copying and pasting in and out of the browser session, or at least between certain tabs that may be marked like personal tabs versus like corporate, the watermarking features and more. But like a lot of this is available in all containerized or secure browser offerings, but perhaps, like I said, that granularity of control is what sets Island apart. It'd be interesting to see if this does convert into actual success for the organization or the company. Island did tell the Register that it currently has over 200 customers, including firms like Ashland Chemical, Mattress Firm, ED&F Man, and Bank of Marion, and others. So just like the way I'm interpreting that or reading that as well, not huge names necessarily that it's being listed as customers, but that doesn't really mean anything because a company could have very large customers who just do not agree to be publicly named. 200 customers is still relatively small. It would be interesting to see what their customer base is like in a few years, and certainly this level of funding and this level of mainstream media attention is not going to hurt their cause. So let's see how things go. A quick heads up that a previous issue with Bitlocker reporting, including in platforms like Intune, has now been fixed by Microsoft. According to BleepyComputer.com, Microsoft has resolved this bug in KB 5034204, which is a preview update that was released on January 23rd for Windows 11, and the KB 5034763 cumulative update that was released on February 13th for Windows 10. So if you're still experiencing that issue, unlikely that you're going to be installing the preview update, but possibly installing that cumulative update if you have not already. In a relatively old story at this point, but one I missed a few weeks ago, Microsoft fixed an issue on Windows 10 with Sysprep. Administrators were getting a 0x80073CF2 error that stated, quote, Sysprep was not able to validate your Windows installation. After resolving the issue, use Sysprep to validate your installation again, end quote. So, typical generic Sysprep error. Since this has been fixed, chances are you are not experiencing this anymore, but if you still opt to do patching maybe a month out from when the patches have actually released, it is possible you're listening to this and still encountering the issue, in which case Check out the latest Windows updates as this has been fixed. And I'll share a link to the article about this fix with this episode, which is episode 332, and you'll find that at 5bytespodcast.com. Okta are warning of an unprecedented spike in credential stuffing attacks targeting its identity and access management solutions, with some customer accounts breached in attacks. In all attacks that Okta observed, the request came through the Tor anonymization network and various residential proxies such as Lumanti and Data Impulse. Okta has provided a set of actions that customers can take to block these attacks at the edge of the network, including to enable threat insight in log and enforce mode to block IP addresses known for involvement in credential stuffing proactively before they can even attempt authentication, deny access from anonymizing proxies to proactively block requests that come through shady anonymizing services, switching to Okta Identity Engine, which offers more robust security features, including CAPTCHA challenges for risky sign-ins and passwordless authentication options like Okta FastPass, and also implement dynamic zones, which enables organizations to specifically block or allow certain IPs and manage access based on geolocation and other criteria. So if you are an Okta customer, you may want to heed this advice. A new version of the 2022 Product Security and Telecommunications Infrastructure Act is now in effect in the United Kingdom, and it covers just about everything that a consumer can buy that connects to the web. Ars Technica reports, under the guidelines, even the tiniest Wi-Fi board must either have a randomized password or else generate a password upon initialization through a smartphone app or other means. This password can't be incremental, such as like password 1 or password 54, and it can't be related in an obvious way to public information, such as MAC addresses or Wi-Fi network names. A device should be sufficiently strong against brute force access attacks, including credential stuffing, and should have a simple mechanism for changing the password. They should also be securely updatable, updating either automatically or in a way that is simple for the user to apply. And it appears this act will apply to manufacturers or companies operating out of the United Kingdom, and those who are found to be in breach can face a penalty of up to £10 million in fines. Personally, I think this is actually a great thing. This is a smart move, and too often when getting like a manual for a new appliance, device, or even just software, the password or the default password provided is just so weak. It doesn't really make any sense. You could make it a complex password since it's default password, and you could have it randomly generated each time. But so many organizations just keep a generic, simple password as a default for all customers, and that's not a good practice. So good move, UK. According to a report by bleepycomputer.com, some Google Chrome users are reporting having issues connecting to website servers and firewalls after Chrome 124 was released last week with its new quantum-resistant X25519 Kyber 768 encapsulation mechanism that is now enabled by default. Google started testing the post-quantum secure TLS key encapsulation mechanism back in August, but has now enabled it in this latest Chrome version for all users. The new version utilizes the Kyber 768 quantum-resistant key agreement algorithm for TLS version 1.3 and quick connections to protect Chrome TLS traffic against quantum cryptanalysis. As system administrators have shared online, since Google Chrome 124 and Edge 124 started rolling out on desktop platforms last week, some web apps, firewalls, and servers would drop connections after the client hello TLS handshake. The issue has also affected security appliances, firewalls, and networking middleware in various network devices from various vendors, including Fortinet, SonicWall, Palo Alto Networks, and AWS. These errors are not caused by a bug in Chrome, but instead caused by web servers failing to properly implement TLS and not being able to handle larger client-hello messages for post-quantum cryptography. Affected Chrome users can mitigate the issue by going to chrome://flags/#enable-TLS13-Kyber, which is with a K, and disabling the TLS 1.3 hybridized Kyber support in Chrome. My God, there are so many difficult words in this story. Administrators can also disable it by toggling off the post-quantum key agreement-enabled enterprise policy under software policies. Google Chrome are contacting the vendors to get an update for servers or middle boxes on their networks that are not post-quantum ready. Microsoft has also released information on how to control this feature via Edge group policies. However, it's important to note that long-term post-quantum secure ciphers will be required in TLS, and the Chrome Enterprise policy allowing disabling it is something that will be removed in future. So if you try to use this as a band-aid solution just to work around the problem for now, and you just forget about it and don't contact your vendor of choice that's having the problem with this version with the TLS handshake, it could come back to bite you because that option and that band-aid's going away. Hive Systems, a cybersecurity solution provider, has released their 2024 edition of its Hive Systems password table and some additional studies detailing how long it takes different NVIDIA graphics cards to crack a password. I'm not going to go through all of the numbers because there's several in the chart provided in the article by tomshardware.com, but they show how long it took to crack passwords with various pieces of kit and various different levels of password complexity. And it seems like some of the NVIDIA graphics cards are able to crack complex passwords in under an hour, which is maybe not all that surprising, but it's cool to see the actual data. AWS's first quarter results saw a 17% year-on-year uptick in revenue to $25 billion, as well as a $9.4 billion profit. In comparison, the company's revenue and profit for the same quarter in 2023 was $21.4 billion and $5.1 billion respectively in the profit. During the earnings call, generative artificial intelligence or Gen AI offerings and their growth was discussed and amplified. So, obviously this is going to be a big growth area for all public clouds. They said, quote, "We're at $100 billion plus annualized revenue run rate, yet 85% or more of the global IT spend remains on premises. And this is before you even calculate Gen AI, most of which will be created over the next 10 to 20 years from scratch and on the cloud. There's a very large opportunity in front of us," end quote. Which, yes, that certainly does seem to be the case. But even looking at those numbers, comparing the year on year with the previous year, a profit of $9.4 billion at this point this year versus $5.1 billion last year, when the revenue was $25 billion this year versus $21.4 billion last year. Not a huge difference in terms of revenue. Well, I mean, it is huge because it's multiple billions of dollars, but in the grand scheme of things, maybe relative to this, it's not huge. But that profit margin has increased substantially, which is very, very interesting. It might indicate, changes to the costs or operational costs for AWS themselves, and perhaps not reducing their pricing yet to match what they're spending themselves. I obviously covered on previous episodes podcast that Alibaba significantly cut the cost for customers and billing. So perhaps, given this profit margin, maybe AWS and possibly others as cloud providers will start to lower the prices to be more competitive. I guess we'll wait and see. I mean, when the run rate is what it is for AWS, do they even need or feel a need to lower their prices to win more competition? Possibly not. In more AWS news, AWS has responded to tweets and a blog post about unauthorized access attempts against S3 buckets, leading to costs and charges on the customer's AWS bills, regardless of the fact the traffic is unsolicited and unwanted. Fortunately, it looks like AWS is investigating, and it is possible these types of nefarious transactions and unwanted transactions will no longer feature on customer bills, which is frankly the way it should be. So, I mean, hopefully that's going to be good news and perhaps be a way to reduce costs and possibly eat into that profit margin that I just talked about in the last story. In one more AWS related story for this week, there has been some speculation at the time of recording this episode and scripting this episode online that VMware Cloud and AWS have severed ties with a whole lot of engagement on the layoff.com forum site with reports of mass layoffs from the division. There is a whole lot of Broadcom smack talk in the forum, and of course, it should be taken with a pinch of salt. I mean, the whole draw of the layoff and the reason why people even post on that forum site is because it is anonymous. But with that comes the risk of potentially bad actors filling up the forum with BS. But could be a case of where there's smoke, there's fire. There's also been activity on Twitter and other social media outlets suggesting that this is the case. But at the time of recording this, there has been no public confirmation from AWS or from VMware. It means perhaps that it has been made public by the time I went to publish. According to Ars Technica, Apple has poached dozens of artificial intelligence or AI experts from Google and has created a secretive European laboratory in Zurich, Switzerland, as the tech giant builds a team to battle rivals in developing new AI models and products. According to a Financial Times analysis of hundreds of LinkedIn profiles, as well as public job posting and research papers, Apple has undertaken a hiring spree over recent years to expand its global AI and machine learning team. It's reported they've particularly targeted workers from Google, attracting at least 36 specialists from its rivals since it poached Google's top AI executive in 2018. Now, just because Apple are making these waves doesn't really mean much because, reportedly, they've been working on their own autonomous car for many years, and then a few months ago, it was reported that they decided to scrap the project. So just because they're considering throwing their hat into the AI ring does not necessarily mean that they're actually going to do it and it'll see the light of day. They may be better off partnering with an AI company. But hey, we'll see. Apple does like to keep the ecosystem under its own rule, so maybe this is not optional and they have to succeed at AI to successfully integrate it with their products. IGEL Disrupt was held in Florida this week, and I saw a press release stating that Microsoft was a platinum sponsor, and I did see some posts on social media that showed Scott Manchester was presenting a session on stage at the event on Windows 365. But I did not see a whole lot of new announcements or anything from the vendors who are attending the event as new announcements. Like if you go to IGEL's website and go to their blogs and news, at least at the time of recording this, which is well into the second day of the event, there were no blog posts or news articles about even announcements from IGEL themselves. I'll keep an eye on it. Perhaps IGEL will do what Microsoft has done in just actually consolidating all event announcements into a blog post that they'll publish later. Although Microsoft does tend to release the book during the actual event itself, not after. But hey, maybe IGEL will do it afterwards. Or hey, if you're actually at IGEL Disrupt, which I know a lot of my friends are, if you are aware of any announcements during the event, let me know and I'll cover it next week. Well, that's it for the news this week. Let's cover some scripts, tricks, and tips. First up this week, while I was at EUC Unplugged last week, I attended a session on Evergreen by the awesome Aaron Parker, and he shared a commandlet that I was not aware of and had not used yet, which is the Get-EvergreenEndpoint commandlet, which returns an array of applications, endpoints, and ports required by Evergreen to source application updates and URLs for application downloads. So if you're in a pretty restricted lockdown environment, for your packaging of applications or even just for staging them onto your deployment shares, this is going to be very useful for you for listing and configuring your firewall rules and stuff like that to allow the downloads. Hey, and to promote a little bit of my own work, I posted a new episode in my Office of the Technologist series that I do for Numescent, and this one is on the Windows 10 extended security updates and how you can avail of the free Windows 10 extended security updates or substantially discounted updates and how to do so most effectively. Finally, I saw an article by Fortune.com that is featuring the host of the popular RSA conference, and they published an article on what is top of the mind for security experts right now. And it goes through some of the hot topics for security experts that are likely to be featured at the next RSA conference. And I just thought it was an interesting insight to someone who's obviously very deeply entrenched into the security community. Well, that's it for this episode of the podcast. As always, thank you so much for listening.